Yes.
So we should be able to look at the presentations here, right? I believe. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, Christine. Dina. Nice to meet you. Hello. Yeah. So nice to meet you. Hi everyone, welcome. You can hear me? It's not on. I think it's on, yeah. Hello, welcome to our side event. Sorry for the little delay. Our panel is quite big and the table is not long enough. Welcome to our panel on just urban transitions, transformative visions for a low-carbon future. We will look at the role of cities or urban areas in mitigating climate change and the role for a just transition. we have two different angles from which we will look at this topic. So we will, on the one hand, look on the interrelations with decent work, social equity, poverty reductions, and we will have a report published by the Friedrich Ebert Foundation that will be kind of the base of discussion. And then we will hear another report published by CLASP, and we will look at integrating energy efficient appliances in the context of just urban transitions. And yeah, before I will present our amazing panel, just a few words. Why do we talk about this topic? Why do we talk about cities? They can be critical sites for change and for just transition. Cities are responsible for around 75% of the world's energy consumption and over 70% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And at the same time, cities will also be profoundly affected by climate change. And looking at efficient appliances, they can strengthen climate resilience. However, appliances also have a major climate impact. So we will look at this challenge, and maybe I should also mention who's actually organizing this side event. So we are here with the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, with the Climate Action Network, Southeast Asia, and CLASP. And I'm really happy to have from all organizations panelists here with us, and also some other high-level panelists who were eager to join our panel. And now going over to who is actually with me here. I'm just starting in the sequence that you can see on our poster. So let me start with Alison Tate here in green and blue. She's the Director of Economic and Social Policy at ITUC, at the International Trade Union Confederation. Welcome, thank you for joining us. Then on the end of the table, and I'm really sorry that we don't have another chair on the stage. I welcome André Andrade. He is the Director of Climate Governance and Articulation at the National Secretariat on Climate Change of the Brazilian Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. Great that we have you. Welcome. Then here on my left, also sorry for the chair situation, Christine Egan from our partner organization CLASP. She's the Executive Director and CEO of CLASP, which is an organization dedicated to energy efficiency of appliances. Then on my right, in yellow right now, Lina Shabib, the former Ministry of Transport in Jordan, and now Associate Professor at the Al Hussein Technical University. Welcome. On the other end of the table, my colleague from the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, Marielle Navarro. She's Project and Event Manager at our FES Office Social Ecological Transformation in Mexico. Welcome, Marielle. And next to her, Özlem Ünlüer, I hope that I pronounce your name correctly, I'm sorry. She's the Sustainability Director of ICLEI, the Turkish multinational household appliances manufacturer and retailer. And then next to my side, last but definitely not least, Tasneem Aesop. She's the Executive Director of the Climate Action Network International. Welcome, everyone. And an applause, please. And so, giving you an idea of our agenda today, we will have two presentations of recently published reports, as I already mentioned. First, Marielle Navarra will present our FES study on just urban transition and labor. And then Christine will present their study about net zero heroes, scaling efficient appliances for climate change, mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. And after these two presentations, we will have a first panel round where every one of the panelists can react to one or to both reports, or just share some of their experiences and insights on the topic of just urban transition. And afterwards, we have a second round of discussion where I will ask a few questions to our panelists and then give the floor to you so that you can also ask your questions. So giving over to Marielle. Maybe I can also just give you the...
Hello, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us, and to all my fellow panelists. So today I'll be talking briefly about a recently published study by FES and the Stockholm Environmental Institute on just urban transition and labor. As my colleague already mentioned, cities are responsible for the world's 75% of energy consumption and 70% of the greenhouse emissions. Cities are also quite particular since they often offer us a vast area of study for intersection of climate, gender, and social vulnerabilities. Commonly, there is a low understanding of the social justice and climate justice implications of low-carbon transition, especially for a myriad of different sectors, such as waste management, informal transport networks. And cities are also often a byproduct of what we call is a sustainable and extractive neoliberalism, which not only has increased the social vulnerabilities found in cities, but has also placed us in a place of constant crisis, whether it is economic crisis, social crisis, and now climate crisis. And this is why for FES and the authors of this paper, it's important to talk about just urban transition in the context of a transformative approach, meaning that it must be a break with business as usual models, and that only from a very groundbreaking perspective, we will be able to actually achieve the changes that we need in order to improve living conditions within the limits of climate resiliency. So it's obviously a rights-based approach. It talks a lot about how the people living in the cities have the right to shape the cities they live in. So instead of having only top-down policies, it's also very important to look at grassroots movements and bottom-up norms and how they usually interact with urban planning, with urban structures, to see how people actually shape the cities they live in and why some policies fail or succeed within this framework. It's also grounded on human rights, on having a right to a safe environment. But it also asks us to consider international labor distribution and how that usually affects cities, and why cities in developing countries may not look the same as cities in the global north. For this study, the authors looked at some urban transformative frameworks, and they said that even though most urban frameworks now talk about transforming the cities, they have very different entry points. So some of them are still very on the business as usual model, placing profits over human well-being, whereas what we actually need to do is to find an entry point that balances economy, human well-being, and environmental factors. So the study aims to provide concrete examples on how people are actually embracing just urban transition rather than continue just on a literature review. So the FES has offices all over the world, and the authors interviewed 14 different organizations that are somehow being involved with just urban transition. They have examples from Africa, Latin America, and Asia mainly, but also a couple from Europe. They emphasized the synergy between social equity, poverty reduction, reduction of greenhouse emissions, and decent work examples. Basically, the overall structure of the study is a background analysis. Then it goes into 4 categories, which is urban form, informal job, formal jobs, and green jobs. Then it provides us with some policy and governance guidelines, and it presents a conceptual framework on what the FES should push for when it advocates for just urban transition. So first of all, regarding urban forms, it says that even though density is important, because as one of the respondents say, you cannot have sustainable suburbia, it is not necessarily a requisite for just urban transition. Why? Because sometimes the overly dense cities can have other byproducts such as air pollution, water pollution, that are very damaging to the environment and almost equal out as having a very large city in terms of area. They propose a 15-minute city where everyone can travel to work or get access to a health department or to education within a 15-minute walk or public transport ride. They also explore urban greening, which may not only be environmentally beneficial, but also socially beneficial as it helps social cohesion and may, in some cases, such as the Bangkok roof terrace, enhance food security and circular economy within local governments. It also talks about how in many cities there is a current lock-in in which people prefer the government to prioritize private vehicle usage, because so far the investment in public transport has not been funded enough for people to want to rely on public transport. Then also it talks about how public transportation is one of the great examples of how particularly gender inequalities can be seen and why women are sometimes less prone to take public transportation, and how this is a social problem that has severe environmental impacts. And that city planner, as it was emphasized in the beginning, really needs to also consider bottom-up norms. So how are people traveling? Are they pedestrians? Are they taking the bus? Why are they making the choices they're making? So that when listening to the people, governments and city planners can take all of this into account. Particularly in the Global South, there is a lot of talk about informality, and they explore some sectors, particularly the waste management sector, which is pivotal for a lot of environmental projects, but that in the Global South is sometimes completely informal, without access to social security, without access to health insurance. That this also has gender implications. So why are women and young girls working in this very vulnerable sector? And that there is no one-size-fits-all solution, so that when it comes to informality and the different aspects in which informal work can be found, for example, transportation or waste management or even care, a lot of talks and a lot of horizontal dialogue needs to happen so that governments and academics can take this into account when producing new policies and knowledge. Regarding the formal sector, there is a lot of talk about the jobs that will be lost, particularly in the automotive sector, for example, in Indonesia, but also how many of these jobs will need a or upskilling of the people, and how this might also be an opportunity to improve technical formation and education for young people in these countries. There are a lot of differentiated vulnerabilities regarding who may or may not access these newly opened jobs, as they are mostly going to be high-skilled. But this is another area where environmental planning needs also to look at educational planning, so that the national development plans not only foster, for example, the EV creation, but also help the educational system within their countries have the necessary human resources to fill in these new jobs. It's also very important to say that decentralization and policy environments are vital in the formal sectors. There is a lot of talk about, for example, in energy, how to take back some of the power by the centralized fossil fuels organization, and this is going to happen with a lot of local interventions, so empowering municipal governments and regional organizations, but also with a lot of political will. So some of these examples prove how a policy can actually be successful or unsuccessful, depending on not only like the technical requirements, but also the political leaderships of the mayors and the city councils that are ruling a particular town.
Marielle, I'm really sorry, just I have to be strict with time. Maybe one more minute, and then
Yes.
we have to go to the next presentation. Thank you.
Regarding green jobs, so far for cities, there is a lack of systemic definition of what these green jobs might look like, but some examples of formal transport networks and greening rooftops might point as to how to create these opportunities. Then to conclude, for FES and the authors of this study, it's very important that social and gender equity, low carbon development, and decent work are seen as equal pillars in just urban transition, so none of them should take priority over the other. And we should use governance and learning from the urban form to foster just urban transition. Highlighting some of the key barriers that are still capacity building and financing gaps, particularly at municipal and local levels, but also the transformation of power relations that needs to go through a lot of negotiation and political will, and sometimes that is exactly what is missing. So basically, those are the main findings of the study done by FES. Thank you very much, and Sarah.
Thank you so much, Marielle. And now I will give the word to Christine. She brought us a video also to, I think we see the video first. I needed to give a sign there, I think. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much. It's an honor to be here with the group at this event and in the panel. I'll be talking about our net zero heroes, scaling efficient appliances for climate change mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. This is a new report that CLASP has just released. The essential tenet of the report is that efficient appliances, lighting, and equipment are critical climate solutions, and really wanting to draw out the point that they sit at the nexus of mitigation, adaptation, and resilience, and appropriate to this panel are essential for a just energy transition. One of the things that we know is that although appliances are a part of our everyday lives, they actually have a major climate impact. In this study, one of the things we did was to really take a different look at the contribution of appliances than the traditional perspective. The easiest way for me to explain this pie chart is to say that we took the power plants out of it. There isn't a power sector in this chart. Instead, we looked at what are those power plants powering? What are the end-use devices that are powering? And when you look at that and include biomass cooking and heating, you see that appliances are responsible for nearly 40% of energy-related CO2 emissions. It's an enormous amount. Just for perspective, that's equivalent to the CO2 emissions of China, Europe, and Brazil. So these devices that we use every day have a major impact on the climate. We took another look at this, and we looked at IEA's net zero by 2050 analysis. That analysis gives each sector a renewable energy budget. This is a renewable energy budget that we have to stay within. Notably, if every sector does this, we have about a 50-50 chance of remaining on 1.5 degrees. What we see, and to say something similar to the last panelist, is that in the business as usual scenario, we are nowhere near meeting our goals. We will exceed that renewable energy budget by about 126 exajoules. But what was notable for us, even those who work for many, many years, like me in appliance energy efficiency, is that even if we achieve our current global benchmarks, the goals that we've set for ourselves as a community, we are likely to exceed that renewable energy budget by 98 exajoules. That means our goals are not presently ambitious enough. We need to move the goalpost, and we need to increase ambition. If you look at this from a CO2 perspective, in the business as usual scenario, we will exceed by 9 gigatons, and even in our global benchmarks, we are over 7 gigatons at risk of overshooting that IEA net zero target, again, giving us just that 50% chance of staying within 1.5 degrees. I should note that the charts that I've just shown in terms of sourcing comes from IEA data, CLASP's MEPSI tool, and GCAM. So there's quite a bit of modeling to back up those numbers. At the same time, one of the things that we need to draw out that is very much underappreciated is that there are billions of people who do not currently own the appliances that they need to live healthy lives, to live resilient, adapted lives in a warming world. Many of those countries where those access gaps are largest are also those at most at risk of climate change. Over 3.6 billion people live in regions highly vulnerable to climate change. And we really started to look product by product at what are those access gaps. This is an example for air conditioners, fans, maybe the most obvious product that we're going to need to have access in an increasingly warming world. And what you can see is that, I should first note that this is based on S.E. Farrell's Chilling Prospects report. The gray is simply places where they didn't have data, they didn't study. They looked at 45 high-risk countries and 22 countries with a more moderate risk. But what you see when you look at this is that there are 1.2 billion people who are at high risk of lacking access to room air conditioners or fans, making it incredibly difficult for them to cope with rising temperatures. When you take a medium risk and look at more lower and middle income countries, you get to almost 2.4 billion people. And just to take a minute to dive into one country, you might look at India and say, well, the penetration of air conditioners is actually pretty good. We're at 70 to 80%. Given the population of India, there's over 300 million people who are at high risk from absence to an air conditioner or a comfort fan. And if you want to take a city's perspective, there's a recent Guardian article that just dove deep about what the life of a low-income woman in New Delhi living is like without a fan, without an air conditioner, when temperatures inside reach 30 degrees. For reference, 35 degrees is incompatible with human life. This is another example of electric cooking. Only 15% of the world currently has access to electric cooking. If we're going to meet our climate targets, we need a greater portion of the world to have access to electric cooking. In some place like South America, this means transitioning away from fossil fuel sources. But in some place like Africa, we actually have to move from biomass and wood. The traditional path would be to go from biomass, wood, to LPG or fossil fuels, and then on to electricity. We don't really have time for that. And so this is a place, this is perhaps one of the most ambitious targets that we have to achieve. So we want to sound the alarm. There's a mitigation challenge where our goals are not big enough on this side of the house. These appliances are not in the hands of enough people who need them to be adaptive and resilient in a warming world. But we've identified a clear pathway. We've identified our net zero heroes. And while I will not go into them product by product, because we'd be here for a very long time, I will tell you that if you read the report, there is a target, there is a recommendation that we are putting out as what we think we need to be pursuing for air conditioners, comfort fans, electric cooking, heat pump water heaters, motors, LED lighting, refrigerator freezers, and solar water pumps. And these are the technologies and the products that we believe we need to focus on to meet both our mitigation, adaptation, and resilience goals. If we do this, we get within 20 exajoules of the renewable energy budget. We believe that with behavior and with building envelope design, we can close that gap and manage to achieve. So this is the only scenario that we've seen that keeps us on track from an exajoules renewable energy budget perspective, as well as bringing us down to where we need to be from a CO2 mitigation perspective. So, in summary, we want to call attention to the fact that there is a 9.2 gigaton opportunity versus the business as usual scenario if we enable appliances by meeting our net zero hero targets to achieve their goals. In addition to that, we need to be really clear that you will decrease the risk of climate exposure for millions of people. You will increase their quality of life. You increase their food security. You increase their economic opportunity. And you increase and improve health outcomes to the benefit of an enormous number of people. I gave the example of electric cooking. For women and children in particular, the health implications of burning from fossil fuels or wood and fuel is actually, biomass is actually quite significant. And so this is our call to action. This is our plea to focus on the net zero heroes, be ambitious in our goals, and manage to tackle both the problem of mitigation and giving access to these life-saving devices to people worldwide. With that,
thank you, Christine. Thank you both for the presentations. I think we have a really good insight now, like how the justice component is important and relevant in transformations to low carbon cities, low carbon development. And I think we have a good balance with the first report giving more like a conceptual idea of how we have to really find a balance between economy, human well-being, environmental factors, and the second presentation showed us really hands-on. I mean, we all use these appliances every day. What role they can play in mitigating climate change. And now I would like to give the opportunity to the panelists to react to the reports or also share some insights from their experiences. So first, I would like to give the word to Lina Shabib. Don't be. No, don't worry. I will just tell you maybe that I planned 5 minutes for everyone, but now we're a little bit late with our time schedule, so maybe 5 minutes maximum. But yeah, it would be great to hear also maybe from your Jordan experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for both presentations. I think they were brilliant. I would like just to give some reflection of what we have been doing in Jordan for many years and what we are advancing and how can it be related to the work that has been presented. When we consider the urban setup, and I would like to stress on those both issues, the urban setup and how it is related to the transport. And then I will also reflect on the informal sector and how that, the just transition could affect the informal and as well as formal. So regarding the urban system in Jordan, unfortunately, the city of Amman, which is the largest city or the capital of Jordan with around 4.5 million inhabitants, has been growing tremendously without proper planning for some time. So it was late to come up and develop a master plan after so many years of I don't like to say chaos, but it was something like that similarly, unfortunately. So the work has been started maybe late after the city has been grown to reach 2 million. And after the Arab Spring, and the Syrian crisis, and also after Iraqi crisis, so Jordan was not lucky with having so many, term all around, where we have so many refugees and people are resettled in Jordan for some times. That was opportunity, and at the same time, it was a challenge to face. So Amman started to have a master plan at that time, and at the core of this master plan was transportation, and how can transportation be better spine for movement and make the city work better. Again, it's nice to have so many things and so many plans, but there are many challenges we are facing, especially in the developing country, how to make those maps in reality. So we have now what we call it a mass transit system, the first mass transit system in Jordan, which is Amman BRT, and it is now in trial operation, and I think it has made a change by the means that people start to make this shift. And this is what we were just listening to bottom up, that it is not always what we need is to plan for people. We need the people to plan for themselves and to take the decision. So the decision that many of the Jordanians at least start to consider public transport as an alternative. Other issues regarding Amman, there are what we call it green buildings, or the how to apply or to consider the sustainability in buildings. And this has been voluntarily and started in 2012, something 10 years back. But it was voluntarily. It has not been implemented at large scale. So still the Greater Amman municipality has made some kind of incentives for the people to start considering have green building, but still we have very people who are interested. But I think what is the real challenge is not the new buildings, because we have also to consider the existing building, and that is the real challenge, how to make the existing building green as the new building. You can give incentives for the new builders, but what about the existing? Which is the same applies for transportation. We have a new system now for mass transit, but at the same time, we have many people who have been used and working in the sector before, formally and informally. So how you need to tackle these issues? And moving another step ahead, which is the EV, which is electrical vehicle. Jordan was one of the pioneers in the area. We started to having EV in 2013, which was, I think, in the Middle East. At that time, it was nothing heard about it. Now we have around 90,000 vehicle EV in Jordan. But at the same time, when we talk about green transport, then we have so many people who have been working as in mechanics and in the service. They are not, have been not educated to work with the EV. The EV is not only, the green job, but also the other issues, which is, I think, needs to be considered, is the charging station that we are facing in order to make such a transition. Informality, female, for instance, I would like to also touch upon this issue, the gender issue. Transportation is a real challenge for women in Jordan. Like 50% of the young female especially, they turn their job because they think that transportation is not safe enough for them, and it is not even, it's very expensive for them. It's not affordable for them to make the transport for their work. So if we consider all the, the outcome of this paper, I think it's very important to highlight that if we look at green job, as correctly said, there is no clear definition what a green job is. But green job means also educating people, making, a change in the mindset of people in order to be able to accommodate the change that we are facing. It's not only like, a slogan that we can work, but it needs more, I think, preparation and have more work in that direction to campaign and to promote, the work in this area in order to be more efficient. Thank you.
Thank
I'll try
you.
to be 5 minutes.
Thank you, Lina. It was really interesting to hear this perspective specifically on transport, and I like that you also raised the gender issue, which also was an important topic in the FES study and also mentioned by Christine. Now I would like to ask Alison Tate to give us your perspective from the trade union background. What does just urban transition mean in your work?
Hello, everybody. So I'm here representing workers, labor, trade unions from 165 countries. And indeed, I'm very happy to follow on from what Lina was saying. When we think about transforming a city, what does transformation mean to you? Some of the factors that you pointed out, being able to get around more easily, being able to get from home to work, being able to connect with family so that if you're working long hours, you are still able to reach other places that you want to go. Not only the quality of the transport, the reliability, and you mentioned the safety, but when we speak about workers in transport, we are speaking about very often informal economy workers, people who are running small, I come from Australia and I can only think of tuk-tuk and jeepneys, it's relating to Asia, local transport options. And if we think about what is needed to ensure that the safety and the dignity of people traveling, we also need to be thinking about the safety and the dignity of people working in transport. Very often, workers are exposed to the highest levels of pollution working in a transport job. Ensuring that decent work, which was mentioned in the first report, is really about not only safe jobs and clean jobs, but being paid decent salaries, being ensured that you have a voice in the workplace, we would call that rights to representation, and to be able to take those issues up with the companies and with the municipalities who are planning these new systems to ensure that not only human well-being, but dignity in work is actually a part of the process of planning. That's a quick way of talking about what a just transition is all about. Because what we're talking about is anticipating the plans, engaging with the right stakeholders, and very often stakeholders doesn't even sound like human beings, but I'm talking about workers. And not only engaging, but really planning together and making sure that those plans take into account what people know about from the grassroots, it's often said. Well, it's grassroots, and often in an urban setting, there's no grassroots left. So if we are speaking about having workers' voices engaged in a process that's going to deliver really both what's urgently needed and a long-term vision for a city and a transformative vision for an urban area and a peri-urban area, that we know that cities are growing more and more as people seek work and move from the rural areas to city areas. It's actually directly connected to food security, delivering food. It's actually directly connected to reducing carbon emissions, obviously. And it's very much directly connected to having people being able to connect with each other. So I would really just say that there's a lot more that I could say. I won't take the time now. But when we look at the planning for skills, the planning for reskilling, it's often vocational education and training with things like jobs guarantees for apprenticeships, for people coming into the workforce, but also those transferring from one job to another. And the vulnerabilities, gender was mentioned, extremely important. Very often in transport industries, it's often a male-dominated industry. for many reasons. We're not going into that now. But the financing of just transition measures at city level, at municipal level, at government level, that's where we're up to now. It's not talking about the principles that are needed to be taken into account. It's about taking the action and doing the anticipation work, making the engagement real, meaningful engagement, having plans that really do address the needs, and of course, enacting those plans, having the follow-up. In this world here at the COP, it's called implementation. We know that human beings know it means doing what you said you'd do. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you. I really like that you broke down for us what just urban transition and transport can mean, connecting people, getting from A to B, from home to work, and vice versa. Now we already heard a governmental perspective a little bit from Lina, and now I would like to give the word to Andre Andrade. What is your take on the topic from your governmental and Brazilian perspective? Thank you.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you, Sarah. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for inviting us, first of all. I will try to give a view from the national policymaker point of view, and I agree with all of you are saying in this panel. And I think that before we try to incorporate this kind of inputs in the climate policy, first we need to understand how a climate policy is prepared, is done, and what we need to change in this cycle to enable transformative approach like just transition, just urban transition, like gender issues. I think that we are all facing the same challenges in all countries of the world, especially in the global south. And in Brazil, when we started the administration January this year, we had 4 main issues in our minds to tackle in the climate policy and climate governance. The first one was related to political will. So we need to keep and assure that political will regarding climate policy will remain over the whole electoral cycle of a mandate, of a presidential mandate, a governor, or a local government mandate. So this is very critical for us because otherwise we won't go ahead without the political support while implementing climate policy. Climate policy is transformative, some highs, and in some ways is disruptive. I'm facing some vested interests when I try to implement a climate policy, so it's very important to have the buy-in of the political side. The second one, to listen people. It's very important to listen regions, different peoples, different voices, companies also. I think that all these stakeholders has a voice, has something to say while we are making a climate policy in Brazil, in Argentina, in Colombia, wherever. And so it's very important to reframe the institutions and the policy process that we have. And we are also trying to reframe our national climate policy. We're going to update our national climate policy next year. We're just starting a working group to prepare a new draft of the law. But also, while doing the climate action plans, we need to have this regional view. So if it is a national climate policy, we need to also discuss with the regions in the country, with the municipalities. In Brazil, for example, we have a human development index that are very close to Switzerland, to Germany, while in other parts of Brazil, we are very close to sub-Saharan African countries. So how we manage a climate policy in such a context? It's different while I'm managing, for example, in Uruguay, that's a very specific country, very small country with a very specific economy. In Brazil, it's quite different, and I'm quite sure that you are facing similar problems in some of your countries. So reframing institutions and processes are very important, and we are trying to do that. Another point is about resources, and I really like my previous colleague that about when you said about the reskilling and the capacities of people working on the issue. It is another issue. I don't know if you are aware, but 65% of the civil servants in the whole world don't have any kind of capacity. They say it was a survey, according to Apolitical, that 67% of the whole public servants don't have any kind of training in climate policy. So we need to change it very rapidly. Otherwise, we're going to go keeping the same path that we are. Also, resources, financial resources are very critical. We just reached $1.2 trillion in terms of climate finance last year, according to Climate Policy Initiative, and only 60 billion went to adaptation. So the most of this money are going to mitigation action. So when we are talking about electric appliances like AC and fans, we are also talking about adaptation, not only mitigation, especially in Brazil. For example, when I saw the Brazilian figure about the ACs, we need to think that Brazil is very different in terms of income. We have in the south and the southeast a very high middle income group, while the low income is in the northeast and north. And most of this map in Brazil is like, when we try to calibrate this map according to income, so we're gonna see that the appliances are most located in the south and the southeast. So we have a problem of justice, climate justice, because part of the north and the northeast, which is the main hotspot in terms of climate change, are not prepared, are not adapted to that. So that's another point, resource. And finally, just to conclude my remarks, is about information. And I think that what we are bringing to this debate is pure information and how I connect and how I consider this information while doing policy making. So to do so, I think that we need to include in the policy-making cycle also the scientists and the science networks. So all these things that I'm saying now is what we are trying to do, trying to reframe in the Brazilian climate policy since January, February this year. Remember, in 2 years we have a COP in Brazil, and this will be a very important COP because it's when we expect to receive a new pledges of the indices from the parties. And we are trying to do our homework to have an ambitious NDC to 25 in order to push the other countries to do the same. And also just remember the debate about 1.5 and 2 degrees. I think that's also very important, especially for us in the South America and also in Africa. We need to keep alive the 1.5 goal, because this is what we are trying to do in the Brazilian climate policy, in our national climate action plan, and we're going to try to push the countries to do the same. So I stop here, and thank you again for all these interesting insights that you are providing, and I stay in touch with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for the points you raised. I think you made really important points, that it's always about political will and finances, and that we also really need to look at adaptation. I think here at COP28 right now we also see we need more funding, and we really need a global adaptation goal. Now I'm going to give the word to Tasnim next to me. Yeah, what is your take on the issue, maybe from more like an advocacy perspective as you work at the Climate Action Network? Thank you.
Thank you very much. What I'd really like to touch on is, in fact, this concept of just transition. And in this conversation, we're talking about just urban transitions and transformative visions for this future. So let's start there. What do we actually mean by justice when we talk about just transitions? From our perspective in the Climate Action Network and wider civil society, justice, of course, is about a number of things. One, it is about procedural justice. So in other words, meaningful participation in decision making. We also talk about redistributive justice. So those who haven't had, and of course many vulnerable, marginalized communities, the working class, those living in poverty and inequity, certainly we would want to see the outcomes of any just transition process as addressing redistributive justice as well. So if we go through defining what we mean by justice, that should shape any planning in a just transition process, but also it should inform, therefore, the kinds of solutions that you come up with. In some cities, electric vehicles work, for example. In other cities, it's going to be a non-starter. In some cities and townships, in cities where those living in poverty live, there are no roads. So, the solutions that we find in the planning for the future, this transformation that we need, has to take into account what the needs are. It has to be people at the center and planning with people for the majority of people. We cannot have one-size-fits-all solution. Public transport, for example, in many of the global south countries would probably be the solution of choice. It promotes mobility. We won't go for private electric vehicles as a mass solution because the masses of people are actually not using private vehicle, cannot afford it. So certainly our starting point around just urban transitions has to be the unpacking of what, therefore, justice is defined as and who we are working for to achieve justice. Who's the justice for? And the planning processes, therefore, would have to be, as I said, inclusive. Workers have to be at the table, as Alison indicated. We have to have impact communities at the table. We're going to have government at the table, in this instance, of course, municipal governments. And we're going to have the private sector at the table. It has to be an inclusive process. This is not a technical planning for just transitions, and just urban transitions are not technical processes. It's not about CO2 emission reductions from the start. That has to come as part of the planning process, but that's not the driver of just transitions necessarily, and it's not going to be the driver necessarily of transformational change. It makes absolute sense that there's, of course, an alignment between low carbon solutions and just and transformative societies in the future. But it's not necessarily the driving, I would argue, the driving reason for why we would need to plan for just urban transitions. So with an inclusive approach, and as part of that inclusive approach, you co-create and co-plan and collaborate about what is the vision for your city or your local town, etc. That has to be inclusive as well, because if we're going to use as our starting point the parameters of what exists now, and then think that we will make incremental changes, like we'll introduce EVs, or, I really like CLASP's, your research and about appliances, etc. Again, we have to look at that based on what is relevant, appropriate, and what's needed in local contexts. Some appliances might be absolutely relevant and appropriate and needed. In other contexts, it won't be. So I'm making a general point, actually, that what you need is procedural justice. Everybody at the table co-create a vision for that future that's truly transformational and that delivers justice. It's not a transition that we're talking about. It's a just transition. We'll have transitions, but it's not necessarily just. So inclusive processes, collaboration around where we want to be in the future, and that it is not a one-size-fits-all solution. And finally, that we must have those who are most marginalized, who are vulnerable, who are living in poverty. We must have their needs at the center of any planning for a just future. So I'll leave it there. I know I spoke longer than I should have, but I just wanted to put that on the table. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tasneem. good reminder that we have to actually think about what we mean when we talk about just urban transition and talk about the definition. We already had this issue raised at several events, and I think it's really important. Now we are missing, of course, the private sector perspective, and I would like to give the word to Özlem Ünlüer. What is your perspective on just urban transition, and how do you see your role as a manufacturing and retailer company? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. By the way, it's a pleasure being here. So from a manufacturing perspective, I would say that the figures show the urgent need to push for policymakers to introduce really energy efficient appliance regulations, because when you talk about the EU, we're talking about a really heavily regulated market, whereas in all these countries that we're mentioning about climate injustice, we don't really talk about these minimum energy efficient appliance regulations being put in place. And the figures that Christine has been showing, they show the urgent need for electricity consumption, for CO2 emissions consumption, and also from a perspective of democratization of the appliances. We're talking about like the middle class. It's almost 2/3 of the population right now, and that's expected to grow to almost like 5 billion people as of 2030. And you cannot tell these people not to buy appliances, because as their purchasing power increases, these people are going to demand these appliances anyway, especially the cooling appliances being the really relevant ones, like the ACs or the refrigerators. This is what really everyone just needs, basically. So the democratization of these appliances, coupled with the fact that we need to produce more efficient appliances, that's the real dilemma, I believe, that we need to solve quickly. Put on top of that, the almost, if I'm not mistaken, almost 16 million people, 600 million people still lacking access to electricity. We're talking about that. That also shows the relation between E and S. They're really interlinked between. So we cannot like say environment is really separate from social. They're very interlinked. So therefore, we first, in the transition period, we first need to figure out how are we going to provide solutions, innovative solutions to these people that lack access to electricity in the first place, and then how are we going to make sure that those people that are going to have the purchasing power to purchase these appliances, that's also called these net zero heroes, how are we going to make sure they're heroes really? How is your dishwasher going to be your hero? Or how are you going to be a hero using your dishwasher? So that's going to be like a determined factor. And so going forward, as an appliance manufacturer representative, I would say that we're very pro for regulation by policymakers, because it's also an issue of competition from our perspective. Because, you know, for instance, for our company, by the way, it's written as Arçelik, but we are going through a major transformation, so the name's going to be changed to Beko soon, so I'm going to refer to it as Beko. So in Beko, we have our net zero science-based targets, right? We've put in place in those targets, and we're trying to grow in countries like Asia, South Africa. We're very predominantly trying to grow in countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, Thailand, or countries in which we're not even talking about these energy efficiency regulations. And as a company, we say we're going to be able to produce these very efficient appliances. And how are we going to do that when we cannot afford to like pass the cost increases to the consumers, or even talk about like demand in the market for these energy efficient products? So these are very interlinked issues for public and government and even NGOs to work together. So that's my perspective.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you really highlighted the role of regulations by policymakers, and the challenge, of course, that not everyone has even access to basic appliances, and that needs to be a first step before we talk about efficient appliances. Now we have 25 minutes left for discussion, and I will maybe ask 2 or 3 questions to the panelists, and then I give the word to you. So unfortunately, we don't have time probably for every panelist to take questions, but yeah, let's use our time well. So Andrada, I wanted to ask you again. So we heard now a lot about social justice related to climate justice. and climate justice and resilience as central themes of just urban transitions, and looking at vulnerable and marginalized communities. How would you say is Brazil addressing the vulnerabilities of these communities to climate change, maybe through strategies that are focusing on giving access to efficient appliances?
It's a hard question to address, but as I mentioned, we are developing our climate action plan. We call climate plan in Brazil. And this climate plan is composed by 3 axes. The first one is mitigation. So we're going to have targets, mitigation targets to 2030 and 2035. And we have, below this mitigation plan, we're going to have 8 sectoral plans, including energy, agriculture, so the main source of emission in Brazil. So that's the first axis. The second axis, which is very important, is the adaptation strategy. So we're going to have, we're going to have targets in adaptation to 14 sectors, including marginalized communities, traditional communities, and rainforest communities. So all these type of trying to address the social and the climate justice, we are trying to work on the adaptation plans. And we have what is a kind of innovative approach, which is a cross-cutting strategy that includes just transition, loss and damages, means of implementation, and means of monitoring and monitoring the plan. So we are trying to put this just transition approach in all sectoral plans that we are developing, including, for example, the 8 sectoral plans for mitigation and the 14 sectoral plans for adaptation. So while doing that, and I think that's very important to what Tasnim mentioned, about to include local people, include regions in this talk. As I mentioned before, it's not a matter of the federal government, which is placed in Brasilia. We don't know what's the reality at the ground, how reality is different from the south to the north in Brazil. So in this climate plan, we are planning have consultations to the different regions in Brazil and these different communities to build a kind of bottom-up plan that makes more, in our view, makes more sense, even to build legitimacy to implement this plan. I think that otherwise you're going to have a plan made by the bureaucrats in the capital city that won't work, as we had in the past. Our national policy is from 2009, one of the first developing countries' climate policy in the world, but we never enabled this kind of dialogues with the subnational governments, with the civil society. Yes, we have this channel, but we need to enhance. But especially with the subnational government, we never spoke with them about the national policy, which doesn't make sense. If it is a federal policy, it's fine. We made it in Brazil, but as is a national, we need to involve the whole levels of government. And this is what we are trying to do, to include all aspects of climate policy, including energy efficiency and just transition, climate justice. And don't forget that we are trying to amend. It is still an ongoing debate in Brazil, but we are trying to amend our federal constitution to include federal climate security within one of the amongst fundamental rights of the Brazilian federal constitution, which is going to be a huge step if you pass this amendment, just to assure that climate justice and just transition is within our climate policy perspective.
Thank you. That's really interesting to hear, and yeah, maybe other countries should consider as well amending their constitutions in that way. Let me ask, who did I wanted to ask? Let me ask Alison, I wanted to ask you, sorry. So you talked about, well, the trade union perspective, and now we heard also again reiterated that we need to include well, local people, or we need to make processes inclusive. Can you tell us maybe a little bit more concretely, maybe from some case studies in cities, how can we best include workers, trade unions in decision-making processes when it comes to urban planning, for example?
It's of course very different in each context, in each country with the different needs and different capacities. But I would say that the fundamental is about having the affected workers through their union engaged in a discussion and in a planning process, in a real planning process. Not coming to a table to have a cup of tea, thank you for being here, goodbye. So in that context, we call it social dialogue. And that dialogue process is covered in labor laws in most countries. Some work really well, some don't work at all. But I think that what unions do when they come to those processes is they bring the evidence about what is most relevant. And I really wanted to follow up with, in the context of Brazil, there's some really great work going on where the unions have done employment impact assessments. They've done themselves the assessment of how different scenarios would impact numbers of jobs, but not only numbers, because we don't want to just be considered a number, as much as the numbers are huge. We are talking about the transformation of industries that impact hundreds of millions of workers, and I represent 210 million workers. You know, we know that from the grassroots, people feel excluded from these planning processes, like their lives and their work is not being taken into account. So those processes of dialogue are really important. But when we come to those tables for dialogue, it's not just for the cup of tea, right? It is actually bringing the evidence, bringing the data, bringing the engagement, bringing the realities. And that will always deliver a more qualitative, a better quality plan. And I think that part of the discussion in policy terms is, it's so urgent, we have to do it now. But you know what? If we don't do it with the right people at the table, it won't have good outcomes, it won't be transformative, it won't deliver justice, and people will, we often call it stranded assets, right? Stranded investments into road building, but it's stranded people and stranded communities. And then we have a lack of trust and things will go slower, not faster. So we say that engaging the workers through the trade unions into those processes mean that the transition planning and the action that's followed up is owned. Even if we disagree, it's owned by the processes, and we can see that that ownership is, people are committed to it. So it's like what you were saying, you know, at the national level, it's not the capital saying that this should be the way it's done. It's actually engaging people in the processes that affect them, and we can all learn from that. And very often it's about the listening, but it's actually about the agreement making. In collective bargaining terms, having an agreement between a company and employees or a government and the workers, it really makes a difference. And so I've answered it in a very general way, but if you like to look at our website, we have a lot of examples in different countries from around the world where this is really made a difference.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think this is, of course, a challenge that we can't, as I think you said it, there's not one size fits all solution. So, of course, we have to look at case studies. I think both reports also refer to different case studies. So it's interesting to look into these reports. Now, we have like 10 to 15 more minutes. I would give the floor to you. I see a question here, and do we have a micro in the room? Okay, perfect.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for all the insights that you brought into this room, and actually each one of you has a very interesting topic and discussion. I'm personally really happy that I attended. Actually, my question is for Christine. Dr. Lina talked about green building, and we know that when you want to start in decarbonization urban city, you start with the big components that maybe that's why you talk about transportation and then buildings, and then we come to the next level, that's efficiency. in appliances. And I really like how you presented it, like the net zero hero. But I think we need also to consider what Özlem was talking about, that regulations and being, before introducing an appliance, it should, the environment or the country should have very strict regulation about the efficiency as a first layer, and then the lifespan of the appliances. So when we are talking about a green building, we are talking about 80, 100-year-old like investment. But when we are talking about appliances, it has a very short lifespan. So this is something I think we need to consider. Being like looking at the appliances these days, unfortunately, many of them you cannot repair. Once they are broken, that's it. So you have to change. And this is coming to the carbon footprint of these appliances and the waste that will be produced. So I think it should be like considered in a holistic approach before maybe encouraging people to go to that path. So how did you consider these items or these areas of discussion?
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to acknowledge the repairability issue. Actually, this is kind of this is the next big thing within the regulatory space. Is making sure that appliances, lighting, and equipment and devices are built in the first place for that repairability, right? And that we're looking not only at the carbon footprint of the appliance in use, but in production, through its lifetime and in disposal. And actually Europe is really leading this discussion of circular economy and repairability. There was a recent regulation in Europe for cell phones, and I would encourage people to look at it because it's really quite cutting edge. But we do see many other countries taking up this perspective. We're addressing this issue with governments around the world, in Thailand and in many places. And so there's no question that this is something that it's a lot more complicated than simply regulating the efficiency of the device. But there's no question that it's the next lens of policy. But to address your question of regulation, I think, I always love to hear a manufacturer calling for global regulation of their products. It makes a heart feel good when that's what you do. But I also think we have to be clear that there is a global a global achievement that we are trying to do from a climate mitigation perspective, and to expect every individual country to take that regulatory burden on individually is really quite a lot to ask, right? And there's quite a lot to do when you're a policymaker, right? And so what we are trying to call for is really a recognition that we all have a responsibility, no matter if we are the policymaker, and that in particular dumping of poor quality appliances on the poor, on the lesser developed countries who don't have that robust regulatory framework is actually unjust and inequitable. And so one of the things the report does call for is alignment of domestic and exports, domestic policy with exports. And so that's another sort of next generation. This is kind of a different idea than, really are we asking every country to carry the burden of individual regulation? I did just want to make one point tying to cities, since that was one of the themes. One of the things that we see here is that cities actually often have the capacity to be more ambitious, to be more innovative, to take on some of the experiments with more ambitious standards, with maybe through procurement processes to actually get the better stuff. The lifetime of appliances is anywhere from a few years to 20 years, depending upon the product that you're talking about. And so actually when you think about that growing middle class, acquiring appliances, lighting equipment, when you think about that woman in India who aspires to have a fan simply to keep her family alive, we need those devices to be efficient in the first place. We need those first acquisitions not to be locking in for short periods of time highly inequitable products. And we see cities really being able to be at the cutting edge of promoting the most ambitious levels of efficiency, but in general that we want to avoid that lock-in. Because actually for a boiler or an air conditioner, 20 years is quite a long time. to be. And actually, just to make one other equity point, when the product is inefficient, it comes out of the consumer's pocket in costs every day. And so if the poorest are paying the highest for use, again, this is simply just an inequitable system. And we need to call to a higher level of standards and efficiency. So I hope I've addressed some of what you've raised, but I think we're pretty well aligned.
Thank you for the question. Maybe we can take two more, or like together, and then answer them together. I see one question here, and let's see if there's another one.
Thank you very much for this interesting session, and I think you've touched upon a lot of good points. However, at the end of the day, we all know that we need to have a comprehensive and holistic approach to the whole issue. I would like to just touch upon a few things that I think also important. One is related to the shared economy, and this aspect that is really important that could serve many, many purposes and in many areas, starting from transportation to public places, etc., etc. And that's also one, because at the end of the day, we are looking at transforming our thinking. And this is kind of a paradigm shift that we're looking at right now, looking at things and uses, changing our lifestyle fundamentally. And that's where I think we need all to collaborate together into this. The other aspect that I also would like to mention is related to the city planning aspect, and where the importance of the public spaces and the importance of the outdoor and the importance of having well-designed and well-planned public spaces that will serve all and that will improve, I think, significantly the quality of life for all. And also, part of that also related to the pedestrian and walkability and all these kind of things, and that will serve public transport, connecting transportation to different modes that will all together work in harmony and to serve the purposes. Additional, of course, to I think, suitable land uses as per the place. The last point that also I want to mention is related to, I think, the inclusivity of the city. And at this point, I think a lot of awareness is needed, because at the end of the day, if you want to bring somebody to the table, they have to know what they're expecting, what they want to know, where they want to reach. I've been into many exercises where we try to have like planning exercises with people in the room from all stakeholders. However, there's lots of prerequisites to that, including having a common vision, creating a common understanding, coming from the same background, trying to reach a common language. So I think a lot of work is ahead of us in all areas, in all aspects. But at the end of the day, I think the success will happen when we all meet together and we all work from all disciplines together to have this new transformation. Thank you. Just a comment, and thank you for all.
Thank you for your comment. Do we have more questions in the room? Anyone? Yeah? We can pass you the mic. I think we don't have translation for French here right now. Yeah? Okay. Perfect.
Merci beaucoup. Je remercie l'ensemble des membres du panel de nous avoir éclairés sur cette question. J'ai été particulièrement saisie quand l'une des panélistes a parlé de ce processus inclusif vers lequel il faut désormais tendre. Mais je voudrais savoir quelles sont les parties prenantes qui ont été exclues principalement auxquelles vous pensez. J'ai écouté d'un bout à l'autre, j'ai entendu parler du genre, mais très peu, par exemple, des personnes vivant avec des handicaps. Donc je voudrais qu'on puisse nous dire quelles sont les cibles qui ont véritablement été oubliées et qui devraient faire désormais partie du processus inclusif auquel vous nous invitez. People living with disabilities, I didn't hear anything about them, so I would like to know who are the person who were putting behind, and then you are calling us to inclusivity. Who are the person that you are waiting on the table of inclusion? Excuse me.
She was saying thank you for the panelists, and on talking about this topic, she was especially interested in the inclusive process that was mentioned by one of the panelists, and specifically she would like to ask about the specific sub-communities that we are talking about when we say inclusive, and who were these communities that were excluded previously. We mentioned the people with disabilities, and what other communities would you think are being excluded, and you would talk about including them further?
Thank you for translating. Who would like to answer the question? Yeah, go for it.
Although I was not the one who raised this issue, but I think inclusivity, it means for me to include all, regardless, sometimes we just mention the gender issue or the disabled or even the youth, the children, but the inclusivity means all. And if we would like to consider the economic as a factor to, I don't like to classify people because we can't classify people by their income, but at least regardless how rich or how poor the people, sometimes we feel that we need to concentrate on the poor people because they can't afford so many things. But for me, I think holistically we should consider all, regardless, because this is the human right. If we are talking about urban planning, the city is for all people. It's for all its citizens. There are some groups that need some more emphasis, and because their infrastructure, for instance, when we talk about pedestrian, they lack pedestrian. It is a priority. It's the right for us, for regardless if we own a car or if we don't own a car. So if you are in a rich area or in a poor area, still you need to provide the infrastructure for all. And the accessibility, for instance, and I would, because it is sometimes personal issues, the elderly, we talk about disabled and we are growing in age, the community are growing and getting older and older. So we don't sometimes take that into account, as we feel that this place is for fit people, for young people who can enjoy their life, and we forget that we are growing. We will be in that position sometimes. So this is the meaning of inclusivity. And regarding, I would like just to comment on the worker. I don't like to separate the worker from the citizen. We are a citizen in the city, regardless what our status in this city. So when we plan, we have to consider the grassroots, because at the end of the day, we are planning for the people, we are planning for the citizen, and it's not only planning, it's even the operation. So we shouldn't forget, when we talk about inclusivity, it is not what we plan for, it is how we operate the city as well, and how we manage the city at the same time.
Thank you. We have one more minute if you want, 30 seconds.
No, I really do want to make the point that there's inclusivity and everybody should, leave no one behind. That's been shared here. But we have to absolutely be clear that there's power differentiation. Yeah. So we can all be at the table and we're all citizens, but that's actually not true. There's power differentiation. These processes where we have everybody at the table, you have to be deliberately planning for addressing the power difference in a room. You have to be able to have the resources and capacity for those who've never really had the power to have voice and make decisions. So yes, inclusive, recognizing there's differences in terms of power, differences in terms of resources, so that they can be equal partners in the conversation. That's all I wanted to add to that.
Thank you. I think that were amazing last words about power imbalances. We always have to look at them. And as we're really out of time now, I just want to thank you all for listening. Thank you, panelists, for your contributions. I think we heard many really interesting insights from different parts of the world. And an invitation to everyone to look at the two interesting reports that were represented. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Oh yeah, let's take a photo with the...